About 30 miles east of the demonic cult's castle, a chase unfolded under the cover of a dark night. Warriors with grotesquely enlarged muscles and reddened eyes fell one after another as Huan Yi cut them down while fleeing. Even as he ran, his blade carved through two more pursuers without hesitation. The warriors behind him snarled and growled, their distorted bodies driven forward in relentless pursuit. Huan Yi staggered, his breath ragged, his clothes completely soaked in blood. Individually, none of them surpassed his strength, but facing nearly 300 warriors who had activated the blood reversion art, escape was his only option. Jukum, whose senses had been heightened to those of a beast, caught the sound of Huan Yi's labored breathing and closed in steadily, convinced that there was nowhere left for him to flee. The terrain ahead opened toward a plain, a place where ranged attacks using sword chi and thrown spears would leave Huan Yi completely exposed. As he burst through a stretch of bushes, he came to an abrupt halt. Despair filled his eyes. In the distance stood hundreds of mounted warriors bearing another military flag of the demonic cult. The banner belonged to the saber and musician sect. The sight drained the last of his hope. Huan Yi let out a low moan and slowly shook his head, accepting the unexpected turn of fate. He acknowledged that this was the end for him, finding only slight solace in the fact that he had managed to help until the very last moment. Jukum grinned viciously as the warriors of the Cursed Sword Brigade closed in around their prey, certain of his imminent death. Huan Yi tightened his grip on his blade. If he was to fall here, he resolved to expend every remaining ounce of strength to take as many enemies with him as possible. As he began to gather his energy, a commanding voice rang out across the field, declaring an order issued in the name of the minor priest of the great demonic cult, calling for the extermination of those who had learned the blood reversion art. Huan Yi froze in shock. At the forefront stood a warrior, clad in gray armor, sword raised high, reinforcing the authority of the command by invoking the will of the great demonic lord himself. In response, more than 400 warriors drew their weapons at once and surged forward with thunderous cries, charging directly toward Jukum and his forces. Dread surged through Jukum as he realized the approaching warriors had not come to support him, but to wipe them out. The warriors of the saber and musician sect descended upon Jukum and his men, cutting them down without mercy. Huan Yi stood frozen in shock, unable to comprehend the sudden reversal unfolding before his eyes. At the same moment, within the great halls, Cheon Yeowun twisted his expression as he stared at the scene before him in disbelief. He concluded that the minor priest's actions were a direct declaration of a battle to the death. Cheon Yeowun responded with unwavering resolve, making it clear that he had not come merely to clear his name of false accusations, but to seize the throne itself. Fury erupted within Cheon Yeowun, his jaw clenched as rage overtook him, and he issued a patriarchal order commanding all elders present to immediately suppress the traitor. The palace guards moved at once, charging toward Cheon Yeowun. Before they could reach him, they were struck down by the warriors of the Saber sect. Blades were drawn tight against the guards' throats as they trembled in disbelief. Only then did they notice who stood beside Cheon Yeowun. 4 hours earlier, at the Saber sect's mansion, located southeast of the demonic cult's castle, numerous Saber sect warriors had surrounded the main building, poised to act at a single signal. Inside an office within the mansion, two men faced one another in discussion. They were Cheon Yeowun, the fourth elder and chief of the Saber sect, and Cheon Yeowun, the minor priest. Yeowun assessed the situation inwardly. He recognized that a single whispered message from Elder Bu had been enough to mobilize half of the Saber sect's forces and encircle the entire area, revealing their formidable defensive strength. He acknowledged that the Saber sect controlled the demonic cult's forces stationed in the eastern region of Guangdong. If they could be brought into action, they would be capable of aiding Elder Huan in dealing with the Cursed Sword Brigade. However, uncertainty remained over how the current discussion would ultimately unfold. Cheon Yeowun observed him carefully and realized that a skin mask had been used. He acknowledged that if the mask had not been removed, he would never have noticed that the man before him was not Elder Huan. He understood that the minor priest had deliberately avoided appearing as himself, knowing that such an approach would have been immediately rejected. From this, Cheon Yeowun recognized that the plan had been thoroughly thought out. Deep in thought, Cheon Yeowun set aside their complicated relationship and reflected on the minor priest's claims. He acknowledged that there was validity in the concerns raised about the patriarch's change in demeanor. He recognized that the other elders had noticed it as well, and that the change had become far more pronounced after the battle at Yurkang Castle. It was not an isolated observation. Even the minor priest, who could be considered the greatest asset among them, had been cast aside. Breaking the silence, Yeowun pressed that they did not have much time. Cheon Yeowun responded by making it clear that he could simply report everything to the patriarch, ensuring that the minor priest would be dealt with before anyone else became aware of it. Yeowun calmly acknowledged that such an outcome was entirely possible if Cheon Yeowun chose that path. Cheon then turned to a deeper explanation, questioning whether Yeowun understood why the sixth sex, despite being regarded as the very foundation of the demonic cult, continued to bow before the Chun bloodline. Yeowun offered no response and remained silent. Cheon explained that the cult worshipped fire and the demonic spirit, and that it was the role of the patriarch to communicate with these forces. He stated that the Chun bloodline had been chosen to fulfill this duty. He then warned that what the minor priest was attempting was no different from seeking to shatter the heavens and bring ruin upon them all. To act without a true cause, he concluded, was akin to trying to walk forward without any ground beneath one's feet. Yeowun questioned whether Cheon believed he would be unable to endure the backlash that would follow his actions. Cheon answered honestly. Even if their mutual hostility were set aside, he believed the burden would be far too heavy for them to bear if they were to follow such a path blindly. Yeowun cut him off and asked whether proof would be enough. At that moment, something abnormal began to occur. The black wrist guard around Yeowun's wrist loosened on its own and started to shift, reshaping itself into a distinct form. When Cheon saw the object taking shape and transforming into a glowing black sword, shock seized him. His advisor immediately sent a telepathic message, assuming that something serious had happened inside the room. The response he received indicated that nothing was wrong, and Cheon made it clear that no one was to enter. Cheon slowly turned toward Yeowun, his attention fixed on what he was holding. Yeowun answered by nodding as he grasped the black sword of the demon lord. 4 hours later, Cheon Yeowun was overcome with fury upon seeing the elders standing with their backs turned, shielding Yeowun. He roared in rage, accusing them of daring to defy his patriarchal orders. Violent energy erupted from the Lord, heavy and oppressive, causing everyone within the Great Hall to pale under its pressure. At that instant, Yeowun moved forward. The Lord froze in disbelief and attempted to shout, but Yeowun's black wrist guard reacted first. It shattered into countless fragments of black metal that floated into the air and reassembled themselves. Before everyone's eyes, the pieces formed into a flawless black sword. Shock spread through the hall as all eyes locked onto the blade. The name engraved upon it was unmistakable: Sky Demon Sword. The letters carved into the sword were immediately recognizable, nearly identical to the writing on the monument left behind by Chun Ma, which stood outside the courtyard of the Lord's palace. Disbelief overwhelmed Cheon Yeowun as his thoughts spiraled in denial. He could not accept what he was seeing and questioned how Yeowun could possibly be wielding that sword. He realized that this alone explained why the elders had chosen to stand on Yeowun's side, yet his mind continued to reject the conclusion. Repeated denial echoed within him as he desperately tried to convince himself that it was impossible. A voice intruded upon his thoughts, warning that accepting the reality before him would mean the end. The voice urged him to prove that the sword was fake, insisting that there was no other way out of the situation. Startled, Cheon Yeowun turned toward the source of the voice. Standing beneath the shadow of a massive pillar behind the elders' seats was a one-armed man, calmly watching him. It was his brother, Cheon Yeowun. Cheon Yeowun instructed him to break the sword, warning that failure to resolve the situation would inevitably lead to his downfall as patriarch. Cheon Yeowun acknowledged inwardly that his brother was right. The instant he recognized the sword as genuine, everything would be lost. Regaining his composure, Cheon Yeowun challenged Yeowun, expressing disbelief that Yeowun could suddenly claim to wield the demon sword and declaring that he would inspect it himself. Cheon immediately sent a telepathic warning to Yeowun, urging him not to allow it, cautioning that no one could predict what might happen once the patriarch laid his hands on the sword. Yeowun responded with a calm smile. He sent the sword rising into the air and guided it toward Cheon Yeowun, inviting him to examine it personally. Cheon Yeowun steeled himself inwardly, convinced that once he seized the sword, he would weaken it with his internal energy and snap it in half. He grasped the hilt with his left hand. Agonizing pain tore through him the instant contact was made. Cheon Yeowun cried out as the searing sensation overwhelmed him, forcing him to release the sword. When he looked down, he saw a burn carved into his hand. Rage surged as he cursed the sword. Consumed by fury, Cheon Yeowun accused Yeowun of placing a petty spell upon the blade. He roared in anger and swung his right hand, force chi flaring violently, and something utterly astounding occurred. A massive black dragon erupted into existence with a deafening roar, its presence overwhelming the hall. Shocked beyond measure, Cheon Yeowun recoiled and hastily retreated, widening the distance between himself and the manifestation. When he steadied himself and looked again, his eyes widened in horror. The black dragon vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. Suspended calmly in the air remained only the Sky Demon Sword. Cheon Yeowun stared in disbelief as the enormous black dragon vanished without a trace. He questioned inwardly whether what he had witnessed had been an illusion created by the sword itself. Yeowun smiled faintly and extended his hand, and the Sky Demon sword responded at once, flying back into his grasp. Shock rippled through the hall. Several sect leaders cried out in excitement, unable to contain themselves. These were leaders of the oldest sects, men who had grown up hearing legends of the Sky Demon sword. They knew it as the legendary blade forged from the bones and blood of the Black Dragon, a sword said to choose its own master. At that moment, Great Guardian Markham realized that the time had come. He rose from where he had been kneeling and slowly looked around the hall. Markham raised his jade medallion high and issued a commanding proclamation, calling upon all members of the Great Demonic Lord's cult to heed the demonic order. With that declaration, the atmosphere within the hall shifted completely. The wielder of the Sky Demon sword was the one who inherited the name of Chun Ma and was to be recognized as the true master of the demonic cult. Cheon Yeowun grimaced as he looked toward the Great Guardian, realizing that Markham had revealed his hidden identity before everyone. Markham announced himself as the guardian of the Sky Demon Order, and declared that he was delivering a message left behind by Father Chun Ma. In response, the hall erupted as everyone shouted in unison, proclaiming glory to the demonic cult. Markham then delivered the final declaration. By overcoming the test left by Father Chun Ma, the minor priest, wielder of the Sky Demon sword, was now recognized as the successor to the title of Heavenly Demon. Yeowun dropped to one knee and proclaimed his acceptance of the demonic lord's command, declaring himself as Yeowun Chun, a descendant of the demonic cult, and pledging to uphold the order bestowed upon him. Cheon Yeowun watched the scene with a deepening grimace. Within his mind, Yeowun's voice continued to rise relentlessly, pleading for salvation and condemning Yeowun as the spawn of a servant. Cheon Yeowun tried to suppress it, ordering the voice to stop, but it persisted. Yeowun insisted that there was still a simple way to eliminate them all, reminding him that he had lost to nothing more than a pawn and had once again failed to protect him. Unable to endure it any longer, Cheon Yeowun suddenly turned and roared in fury, demanding how such disrespect could be shown toward the Lord. Everyone looked up in shock and saw the Lord raging toward one of the towering pillars. A low sound of realization escaped the onlookers. Yeowun and the elders felt a bitter weight settle over them as they saw the truth of the situation. Behind the pillar at which the Lord was shouting, there was no one at all. Yeowun frowned deeply as he watched Cheon Yeowun behave in such a manner. His thoughts drifted back to a conversation from the previous day at the peak of the Five Wise Peak. Yin Moha had questioned Markham about advancing the date of the gathering. He explained that the Patriarch had grown intensely suspicious after discovering the underground floor of the manual library. Knowing that moving in secrecy would soon become far more difficult, Markham had chosen to act sooner than planned. He had stated with certainty that the demonic lord would be able to sense it as well, that although the Patriarch was cold by nature, his recent behavior was abnormal, as he had never been a man completely devoid of heart. Yeowun responded calmly, acknowledging the statement and prompting Markham to continue. Markham explained that although it might not sound reasonable, something was undeniably wrong with their patriarch, or rather, something about him had changed. Yeowun pressed further, seeking clarification on what kind of change had occurred. Yin Moha questioned whether the issue was related to the patriarch's health, unable to immediately grasp the implication. Markham revealed that the patriarch had been repeatedly speaking to someone, and that the one he was addressing was young Master Yeowun Chun. Yin Moha was struck with shock and disbelief. She rejected the claim outright, insisting that such a thing was impossible. She reasoned that if Markham was referring to Yeowun Chun of the Sword Sect, then it made no sense, as the young master had been killed by Great King Hang Yen during the war against the evil faction. Markham clarified that Great King Hang Yen was still alive, still led the evil faction, and had remained one of the 5 greatest martial artists in all of China for the past 30 years. He recounted that 15 years earlier, when the previous patriarch Chun Inji had gone missing, Hang Yen had invaded the demonic cult's territory and initiated a full-scale war. This conflict, known as the Battle of Guizhou's Temple Plains, was the very battle that elevated Yeowun Chun into the ranks of the 5 greatest martial artists in China. Yeowun was taken aback by the implication and questioned whether this meant the patriarch was speaking to someone who was already dead. Markham stated his belief that the patriarch was hallucinating. Ever since the battle to reclaim Zhejiang, the patriarch had been seen staring into empty walls or dark spaces, engaging in conversations with someone who was not there. At first, Markham had dismissed it as the behavior had only begun recently. However, it had become increasingly clear that something was steadily eroding the patriarch's sanity. Yeowun asked what could possibly be causing such a condition. Markham explained that after returning from a battle against someone believed to be the leader of the 6 Berserk Saber warriors, the patriarch had been in an extremely poor state. He emphasized that it was not merely the result of battle injuries. Instead, the patriarch had been suffering from the side effects of performing the demonic blood reversion art. Yeowun was pulled back from his recollection as Cheon cautiously addressed the patriarch, who was still releasing waves of fury, asking who he was speaking to. Cheon Yeowun abruptly halted and turned at the question, momentarily breaking from his rage. Cheon spoke firmly, stating that they were unable to see anyone the patriarch was addressing, and that there was no one present at that location. Cheon Yeowun reacted violently. He pointed straight at the pillar and shouted that Warden Yoo Jung-chun was standing right there before them. Shock rippled through the hall. Even Cheon was shaken. Everyone knew that Cheon Yeowun had died during the war against the forces of evil and that his body had been burned. A mocking voice echoed, expressing amusement at how interesting the situation had become. Cheon Yeowun reacted sharply, demanding to know what had been said, his eyes still fixed on the figure only he could see beside the pillar. Overcome with fury, Cheon Yeowun threatened them all, warning that if the insolence continued, he would end them. He ordered them to leave the Grand Hall at once, declaring that they did not deserve to remain there. Markim immediately dropped to his knees and pleaded with the patriarch. He insisted that there was no one there and reminded him that young Master Yoo Jung-chun had already passed away. He urged him to seek treatment while there was still time. Before he could finish, a sharp wave of sword chi tore past Markim's neck. A cut opened along his right side, blood streaming down as the attack narrowly missed taking his head. Cheon Yeowun erupted in rage, declaring that he understood what was happening. He accused everyone of plotting against him and attempting to frame him as a madman. Raising his sword, Cheon Yeowun declared that he would personally restore order to the cult. Markim attempted once more to calm the patriarch, addressing him with restraint. Yeowun stopped him by gripping his shoulder and shaking his head. Markim looked back at Cheon Yeowun and confirmed his suspicions inwardly. He realized that his guess had been correct and that the signs should have been cleared during the battle at Jejiang. Cheon Yeowun turned his fury toward Yeowun and accused him of being the source of all the chaos. He belittled him as nothing more than a pawn and declared his intent to end Yeowun's life with his own hands. Yeowun felt disappointment rise within him. He accepted that Cheon Yeowun would continue to see him as a pawn until the very end, and understood that those words reflected the patriarch's true feelings. Yeowun calmly instructed everyone to step back. The elders guarding him immediately acknowledged the order and withdrew, moving back toward the gathered sect leaders. The elders watched in tense silence, fully aware that Yeowun had every reason to fight back. Yet despite the patriarch's mental instability and physical deterioration, he remained a mythical master, one of the 5 greatest martial artists in all of China. Doubt weighed heavily on them as they questioned whether their new demonic lord could truly stand against such a being. Cheon Yeowun vanished from his position in an instant and reappeared directly before Yeowun. Force chi surged from the replica Sky Demon's sword and shot upward in a deadly arc aimed at Yeowun's neck. Yeowun had already raised his Sky Demon sword to meet the strike. The blades collided violently, and the sheer pressure of Cheon Yeowun's internal energy forced Yeowun backward. The elders gasped as they sensed the imbalance, realizing that Yeowun was already at a disadvantage in raw internal energy. Yeowun felt it clearly himself. He recognized that without the demon sword, he would have been cut down in that instant. There was no denying that Cheon Yeowun's power stood a full step above his own. Accepting this, Yeowun decided there was no reason to conceal his true strength any longer. He resolved to fight with everything he had. The ominous demonic energy dormant within him awakened. Black force chi poured out from his body like rising steam, flooding the great halls with a terrifying presence. The elders were shaken as they felt the distinct energy emanating from Yeowun. Even the third elder, Gyeong-ja, was stunned as he realized that Yeowun had enveloped his entire body in that power, sensing that he was far stronger than the last time he had been seen. Cheon Yeowun sensed the change as well. He noted inwardly that Yeowun's sword energy had turned black. He understood that this was not a simple amplification, but something entirely different, as the demonic energy sharpened and reinforced Yeowun's sword energy to a far greater degree. Cheon Yeowun forced Yeowun's blade aside and immediately launched a sword formation. It was the sword art of the Sky Demon, the very formation recreated by the sword demon himself. 18 sword movements descended in succession, striking toward Yeowun's shoulders, chest, and vital blood points. Yeowun answered by unleashing his own technique. 24 sword movements burst forth, leaving trails of black light as they collided head-on with the Lord's formation. His attack tore aggressively through Cheon Yeowun's sword art. Ordinary swordsmen would have been overwhelmed by such a reversal, but Cheon Yeowun reacted without hesitation. He swiftly shifted his blade to defend against the remaining strikes. Even Even so, the sheer power of the clash forced him backward under the pressure. Cheon Yeowun was shaken as realization struck him. He recognized the technique as the demonic lord's sword art, something he had only ever witnessed through the sword marks left behind by its execution. He had never been able to master it himself, having failed to decipher the breathing technique required to wield it. The question of how Yeowun had learned such an art burned fiercely in his mind. Understanding that he could no longer hold back, Cheon Yeowun elevated the battle to an entirely different level. He gathered his internal energy into his palm, and in response, a sword leapt free from a guard's scabbard and flew into the air toward him. One after another, dozens of swords were torn from their sheaths, rising and hovering around Cheon Yeowun under the pull of his energy. Yeowun recognized the intent at once and reacted with confidence, noting inwardly that they had arrived at the same conclusion. Cheon Yeowun glared at him, demanding clarification. Instead of answering directly, Yeowun called out toward the open gates of the Great Hall. At once, Hobum, who had been holding back the palace guards outside, sprang upward. He shouted as he drew the blade from his back, pouring his internal energy into the throw. The weapon streaked toward the interior of the hall with tremendous force. Yeowun extended his hand. The blade tore free from its scabbard mid-flight, and the white dragon blade was drawn irresistibly into his grasp. With both legendary weapons now in hand, Yeowun brought the black sword and the white saber together, letting them clash briefly as he settled into a distinctive combat stance. Cheon Yeowun responded with a sharp smile. He mocked the sight of Yeowun wielding a black sword in his right hand and a white saber in his left, questioning whether Yeowun truly believed he could compare himself to Elder Jinwon Mu and his techniques. Without waiting further, Cheon Yeowun activated his technique. He extended 2 fingers, releasing the sword whispering art. At his command, the 7 swords hovering above surged downward, each one independently unfolding and unleashing the sword art of the sky demon as they descended upon Yeowun. Yeowun released a fierce shout as he moved both arms in perfect coordination, executing sword and saber techniques at the same time. From his right hand, he unleashed the sword force formation of the sky demon, while from his left, the berserk saber gods formation surged forth. The combined might of the 2 legendary formations expanded outward, intercepting and countering the 7 sword formations attacking him from all directions. Cheon Yeowun was thrown into confusion as he realized that Yeowun possessed experience with sword whispering itself. Yeowun understood the situation clearly. He recognized that with Cheon Yeowun's energy divided among 7 swords, each individual attack had become significantly weaker. 3 of the 7 swords shattered as they collided with Yeowun's legendary weapons, which were saturated with black force chi. Yeowun immediately determined his next course of action. He resolved to destroy the remaining 4 swords and then strike Cheon Yeowun directly. As Yeowun advanced, another sword broke apart under his assault. The destruction of the sword sent a backlash through Cheon Yeowun. Pain surged through him as the disrupted energy traveled back through the connection, damaging his internal organs. The elders watched closely and realized what was happening. They recognized that the energy link created through sword whispering was being severed, a consequence of Cheon Yeowun's prior injuries. It was clear to them that the patriarch was growing weaker, and they knew that Yeowun could not afford to miss this chance. Yeowun sensed it as well. He perceived Cheon Yeowun's instability and recognized it as his opening. He launched himself forward like a missile, charging straight at the Lord. Cheon Yeowun clutched his head with one hand and slammed his foot into the ground, releasing the full force of his energy. The ground shattered violently, hurling debris into the air. The fragments carried force chi of their own, converging and compressing together into a massive boulder that shot toward Yeowun like a weapon. Cheon Yeowun shouted desperately for Yeowun to stop advancing. Yeowun showed no hesitation. He pressed forward without faltering and swung the Sky Demon's sword, cleaving through the massive boulder and the debris in his path. Cheon Yeowun ground his teeth in disbelief and retreated, forced to step back under the overwhelming pressure. That action bought Cheon Yeowun only a brief moment. Yeowun wielded both of his weapons in unison, effortlessly cutting down the incoming force chi. The shattered debris rained across the hall, forcing sect leaders and elders to retreat swiftly to avoid the fallout. Yeowun advanced step by step, spinning as force chi spiraled around him like a violent vortex. Cheon Yeowun roared and launched his final desperate strike. Their blades collided head-on, blue and black force chi crashing together. Black force chi coiled tightly around Cheon Yeowun's sword as Yeowun shot past him, and the pressure intensified until the blade could no longer endure. The sword fractured and exploded into fragments. Yeowun turned instantly and closed the distance once more, bringing the clash to its conclusion. He spun his saber in wide arcs and unleashed the Berserk Saber God's formation. Dozens of strikes descended in rapid succession, force chi engulfing Cheon Yeowun from every direction as Yeowun passed through him. Cheon Yeowun collapsed to his knees, screaming in agony as blood burst from his his veins. The onlookers stared in disbelief at the overwhelming display of power. Cheon Yeowun's head sank as his body convulsed. Blood poured from his mouth, staining his lips and beard deep red. The Great Hall fell into stunned silence. No one moved. Yet among those present, there was someone who was not satisfied with the outcome. A man clenched his teeth in frustration, realizing inwardly that the patriarch might truly be dead after this, and acknowledging that there was still more work that needed to be done. Cheon Yeowun's eyes turned bloodshot red as he struggled to breathe, his chest heaving violently. Whispers spread through the hall as the silence broke, voices questioning whether the demonic lord had won the battle, with the outcome appearing unmistakable. Cheon Yeowun stared ahead in disbelief, questioning inwardly whether he had truly been defeated. At that moment, a telepathic message pierced his mind. It reminded him that Yeowun had orchestrated an entire revolt against him, urged him not to allow victory to be stolen, and demanded vengeance against the Six Sects for the deaths of his mother and wife. The voice commanded him not to retreat, to eliminate the traitor and behead his followers, and to restore order to the cult, promising that as long as he did not back down, the divine blood reversal art would remain by his side. Cheon Yeowun's mother, Haeun had been the adopted daughter of Bongung, the previous chief of the sword sect. Bongung's biological daughter, Yeehoon was unable to bear children with the former patriarch, Chun Inji. As a result, Haeun took her place and gave birth in order to produce a minor priesthood candidate for the sword sect. Strangely, the moment Haeun became pregnant, Yeehoon also conceived a child. Chun Inji decided that since both children were his sons, they would be given equal opportunity. Chun Yeowun and Chun Yeojung were formally acknowledged as princes. Thus, Yeojung and Yeojung Chun were born, and through the blessing of the previous patriarch, both were recognized as minor priesthood candidates of the sword sect. However, Yeehoon believed herself to be Chun Inji's rightful wife. Not long after, she began to harass and demean Haeun relentlessly. Before Haeun was even able to breastfeed Yeojung, she fell gravely ill and eventually passed away. Yeehoon made her position unmistakably clear. She rejected being addressed as an aunt and demanded to be called Lady Gyeong, declaring that Yeojung existed solely to support Yeojung's rise to the position of patriarch. Yeojung accepted this without resistance. As Yeojung grew up, discrimination followed him constantly. Yet Yeojung was different from his mother. Yeojung apologized sincerely for his mother's actions and promised that once he became minor priest, he would ensure that such treatment would never happen again. He reassured Yeojung of how deeply he cared for him, treating him as a true brother. Yeojung endured a life of scorn and contempt from everyone around him. The only light he had was Yeojung, who regarded him as family without reservation. However, everything changed once they entered the demonic academy. Even there, Yeojung was openly belittled by members of the other 5 sects, mocked for being the child of a second wife who had merely been fortunate enough to be born into one of the 6 sects. The discrimination continued without pause. Yeojung grew exhausted under the constant contempt, yet he endured it all with unwavering belief. He trusted that once Yeojung became minor priest, everything would finally change. That belief sustained him, and he continued forward with hope for the future. But when Yeojung's true martial talent revealed itself, the situation shifted entirely. His abilities far surpassed those of the other minor priesthood candidates. He advanced at an overwhelming pace and succeeded in passing the 5th examination in just 3 years. Yeojung's thoughts reached out to Yeojung, but he was met with cold rejection. Yeojung ordered him not to even speak his name. From that moment on, Cheon Yeowun changed. Like the other princes, he grew wary of his own brother, and the distance between them became permanent. Yeojung understood that it was his own talent that had caused the rift between them. Accepting this, he deliberately chose to stop training and kept a low profile. While the other candidates gathered followers and strengthened their positions, Yeojung refused to accept anyone. Even so, there was one man who persisted despite repeated rejection. That man was Bulwi, the minor chief of the Cursed Sword sect, who pledged absolute loyalty and vowed to make Yeojung the next minor priest if he were accepted. Yeojung knew that the Cursed Sword sect was subordinate to the Sword sect, and he advised Bulwi to follow Yeojung instead. Bulwi refused without hesitation and continued to insist on serving Yeojung alone. As the 4 years at the Demonic Academy neared their end, Bulwi brought grave news. He urged Yeojung to eliminate the other candidates the moment he left the academy. Yeojung was shaken by the claim and demanded an explanation. Bulwi revealed that the other young lords had already banded together and were planning to strike first. He added that Yeojung was also involved in the plot. The revelation stunned Yeojung. Rage surged through him as he seized Bulwi by the collar, rejecting the claim outright. outright and questioning why Yoo-jung would ever do such a thing. Bulwi insisted that he knew the location where they gathered and urged Yoo-jung to witness it himself. Soon after, on the hill behind the dormitory of the demonic academy, 6 princes assembled together in one place. The minor priesthood candidate of the shadow sect Cheon Yeowun addressed the gathered group, confirming that everyone was present. He reminded them that in 10 days, the day of graduation would arrive, and with it, the moment to eliminate him. He questioned whether they were all prepared. Cheon Yeowun, the minor priesthood candidate of the stealth sect, refused outright, stating that he had no intention of resorting to such underhanded methods. Mujin turned his attention to Yoo-jung, questioning whether he had changed his mind simply because the two belonged to the same sect. Yoo-jung dismissed the idea without hesitation. He made it clear that he did not even regard the child of a surrogate as human and declared his full participation in the plan. Hidden atop a tree, Cheon Yeowun watched the scene unfold and was left frozen in shock. He questioned inwardly why his brother would say such things. Until that moment, he had believed Yoo-jung to be the only one who truly considered him family. What he heard shattered that belief completely. The disappointment and anger that flooded him were beyond anything he had imagined. From behind the tree, Bulwi spoke quietly, stating that now the truth was clear and that if Yoo-jung wished to survive, he would have to strike first. Yoo-jung demanded an explanation, questioning why Bulwi had revealed all of this when the cursed sword sect served the sword sect. Bulwi answered that it was because they shared the same bloodline. Yoo-jung was taken aback and pressed him to explain what he meant. Bulwi revealed that Yoo-jung's mother, Lady Haeun-gyung, had been his aunt. Before being forcibly taken and adopted by the chief of the sword sect, she had been known as Haeun-yi. At the time, she had already been engaged. Despite this, she was taken away solely to bear a minor priesthood candidate. In the end, she lived a life of misery before her death. The tragedy that befell Aunt Haeun had filled everyone in the cursed sword sect with deep resentment and anger. Rage surged through Yoo-jung as realization struck. He understood that all the years he had been told he lived a blessed life and should be grateful to the sect had been lies. He realized that both he and his mother had merely been used as pawns by the sword sect, only to be discarded afterward. Bulwi urged him to act first, insisting that doing so was the only way for Yoo-jung to survive and the only way to avenge Aunt Haeun. Yoo-jung questioned how he was supposed to take them down on his own. Bulwi answered with a twisted grin, assuring him that there was a way to overpower them easily. At the time, Bulwi's smile was unsettling, but Cheon Yeowun, consumed by hatred and anger, neither noticed nor cared. On the night the academy ended and all cadets graduated, an incident occurred that shocked the entire demonic cult. Heavy rain poured from the sky, and pools of water on the ground turned red with blood. Bodies lay torn apart everywhere. Cheon Yeowun moved through the princes of the 6 sword sects like a raging wind. His eyes were bloodshot, and his bloodlust far exceeded anything they could have imagined as he slaughtered them one after another. At the end of it all, Yoo-jung knelt before him, calling him brother and begging for his life. He questioned whether this power was the demonic blood reversal art, but Yoo-jung said nothing. Each time Cheon Yeowun begged for his life and called him brother, Yoo-jung was reminded of the moment Yoo-jung had dismissed him as the son of a peasant woman. The memory sharpened his fury. From a distance, hidden among the trees, Bulwi watched with a satisfied smirk. He acknowledged inwardly that this was nothing like the ordinary demonic blood reversal art. It was an enhanced technique created by the sword sect chief's order, a new art with reduced side effects that allowed the user to retain rationality. It was the divine blood reversal art. Yoo-jung continued to beg desperately, apologizing and pleading for mercy, swearing that he would never speak of what had happened, and pounding his head against the ground. Bulwi shouted at Yoo-jung, urging him to kill Yoo-jung immediately, and warning that sparing him would only bring trouble in the future. Yet every time Yoo-jung raised his sword, an overwhelming and unfamiliar emotion seized him, stopping his hand. Even after learning the truth, he could not bring himself to kill the brother he had trusted for over 10 years. In the end, Yoo-jung could not take his life. His blade fell, severing only Yoo-jung's arm. Bulwi ground his teeth in frustration, enraged that Yoo-jung still lived. He rushed toward them, shouting that Yoo-jung must not be spared. Yoo-jung intercepted him mid-motion and slammed his head into the forest floor, stopping him instantly. Yoo-jung then turned his gaze back to Yoo-jung and delivered his verdict. From that moment onward, Yoo-jung would live in absolute humiliation, obeying every command and surviving as nothing more than the wretched existence Yoo-jung believed he deserved. The day after the massacre of the minor priesthood candidates from 4 sects and the severing of Yoo-jung's arm, Cheon Yeowun was arrested. The divine blood reversal art had been said to carry no side effects, and while Yoo-jung Jung remained conscious and rational, the aftermath proved far more severe than expected. Each night, the image of his mother, whom he had never once seen in his memories, appeared before him. She screamed at him relentlessly, demanding to know why he had not killed Yoo Jung. Her voice struck his mind like a living shadow, echoing again and again. Yoo Jung repeatedly reminded himself that this was not truly his mother. Days passed. Only after adjusting his internal energy 5 times was he able to suppress the turmoil within his mind. On the 10th day of his confinement, Yoo Jung was finally released. The four sects confronted the patriarch, demanding that Yoo Jung be held accountable for the loss of their minor priesthood candidates, but their demands were dismissed through the opposition of the sword sect's chief. Cheon Yeowun made it clear that he had upheld his promise. In return, Yoo Jung was ordered to remain silent about having studied the demonic blood reversal art through the 2 shadow sword sects. Yoo Jung accepted the condition without protest. Not long after, Bulwi came to see him. Yoo Jung reacted violently, ordering Bulwi to stay away. He accused him of lying about the divine blood reversal art having no side effects and blamed him for the torment caused by the hallucinations. Acknowledging their shared bloodline through his mother, Yoo Jung spared Bulwi's life, but warned him never to approach again. With that, Yoo Jung left, abandoning Bulwi to his thoughts. Bulwi watched him go with a quiet smirk, believing inwardly that once someone indulged in such power, they would never truly be able to stop. 1 year later, Patriarch Cheon Yeowun summoned Yoo Jung to his palace. Yeowun declared that Yoo Jung would become his successor as patriarch. Yoo Jung was stunned and questioned why the position was being given to him instead of Cheon Yeowun. Cheon Yeowun explained that Cheon Yeowun lacked the strength to endure the dangers that lay ahead. He emphasized that the role of patriarch was not merely one of authority, but of responsibility. The fate of 100,000 cultists rested upon that position. Yoo Jung was instructed to suppress the rage within himself and focus solely on the future of the demonic cult. Yoo Jung knelt before the altar and swore an oath to the patriarch and the demonic lord, pledging his life entirely to the demonic warrior cult. That was how Cheon Yeowun officially ascended to the position of patriarch. He attempted to honor the promise he had made to the previous patriarch, Cheon Yeowun, by suppressing the anger within his heart. Yet the grudges that had taken root in him did not fade so easily. Because of this, he found himself unable to show genuine affection even to his wives. He resolved to become stronger, knowing that he could not rely on the protection of the head royal bodyguard forever. Having risen to the position so abruptly, Yoo Jung's martial prowess initially lagged behind that of the cult's elders. Whenever his duties as patriarch were complete, he devoted all remaining time to cultivating his martial arts. Even so, there was someone who brought light into his otherwise rigid life. A change quietly entered his days. Each time he emerged from training, a female servant would greet him with concern, lamenting how his clothes had once again been reduced to rags. Yoo Jung turned away and dismissed it, explaining that it had simply been troublesome to change repeatedly and that he had trained without his outer robe. The servant responded with visible delight, expressing her gratitude for the way he had taken care of her. Yoo Jung reacted awkwardly, denying that it was anything worth mentioning. She was merely a servant who struck up casual conversation because she found him endearing. Yet Yunhwa was always smiling at him, and before he realized it, Yoo Jung had fallen completely for her. Every word she spoke made his heart tremble, and every small action of hers brought a smile to his face. To Yoo Jung, she became a ray of sunshine in his life. A few months later, everything changed. Yoo Jung was shaken when he learned that Yunhwa was carrying his child. Yunhwa wept as she apologized, fully aware that such a thing violated the laws of the cult. She promised to leave the city and live quietly elsewhere. Yoo Jung seized her, rejecting the idea outright. He declared that there was no need for her to leave and insisted that she remain by his side. He resolved to protect both her and their child, no matter the consequences. Afterward, Yoo Jung convened a meeting in the Grand Hall to announce that Yunhwa was carrying his child and that he intended to marry her. What followed was an uproar unlike anything the cult had ever witnessed. The sect chiefs voiced fierce opposition, and chaos spread through the hall. Only when the previous patriarch emerged from isolation to personally mediate did the turmoil finally subside and a compromise take shape. It was decided that Yunhwa would not reside within the patriarch's quarters. Instead, a separate home would be prepared outside the grounds. Though the residence was neither grand nor lavish, Yoo Jung visited her every day without fail, cherishing the quiet happiness they shared. He believed with all his heart that this peace would last forever. However, as Yunhwa and Yeowun drew increasing attention, jealousy took root among the women of the other 6 sects. That jealousy soon turned into open hostility, and Yunhwa became the target of repeated physical harassment. Then, one day, the previous patriarch, Cheon Yeowun, emerged from isolation and suddenly vanished. The cult immediately dispatched forces to search for him, while simultaneously suppressing all information related to his disappearance. disappearance. In the end, word reached the evil faction. Great King Hang Yen seized the opportunity and led a massive army to invade the cult's territory in Guizhou. The war dragged on for nearly 6 months. No one was able to halt Hang Yen or withstand his overwhelming fighting spirit. 2 elders perished in battle, along with Yu Zhong's half-brother, Yu Zhong. With no other choice, Yu Zhong was forced to step forward as the patriarch and lead the cult himself. Yet just as he prepared to march to war, Yunhua fell gravely ill and collapsed. Yu Zhong rushed to her side and gripped her hand, overcome with concern for her condition. Lying weakly in her sickbed, Yunhua addressed him softly. Yu Zhong apologized, burdened by guilt, lamenting that he had promised to remain by her side and protect her. Yunhua reassured him, telling him not to worry and urging him to go. She explained that the head physician was caring for her and that she would overcome the illness soon. Yu Zhong promised that he would return quickly. Yunhua smiled gently and said she would wait for him. In that moment, Yu Zhong had no way of knowing that this would be the final time he would ever see his beloved Yunhua. Lord Cheon Yeowun led a massive army of the demonic cult and clashed with the forces of Great King Hang Yen at the Sawan Plains. In the midst of the battlefield, Yu Zhong confronted Hang Yen in single combat. The Great King arched his palm, force chi surging outward, and struck Yu Zhong directly in the abdomen. Yu Zhong's body was blasted away and slammed into jagged rocks. Blood burst from his mouth as he fell to his knees. Hang Yen mocked him openly, stating that he had expected more from a patriarch and that Yu Zhong was nothing compared to Chun Inji. He laughed triumphantly, declaring that history would remember this moment as the beginning of a new era, one where Great King Hang Yen became the master who brought down the demonic cult. Yu Zhong's thoughts spiraled as despair threatened to consume him. He realized that if he lost here, the cult would fall, and Yunhua would be lost as well. He acknowledged inwardly that this was the very power he had sworn never to use again. Driven to the brink, Yu Zhong unleashed the divine blood reversal art, which he had suppressed for 7 years. The energy erupted violently, transforming him into a monstrous presence. Faced with Yu Zhong's complete disregard for his own life, Hang Yen was forced to retreat without claiming victory. Fear took hold of him as he withdrew alongside the other top warriors of the Zhonghu. With Hang Yen's retreat, Yu Zhong inherited the previous patriarch's standing and became one of the 5 greatest martial artists in all of China. However, what awaited him upon his return was tragedy. His beloved wife, Yunhua, had died. Zhongwu, the head physician, reported that the cause of death was microtoxins. Yu Zhong overturned the entire cult in a relentless search for the culprit, but no matter how far he went, he never uncovered the truth. Worse still, the after effects of the divine blood reversal art dragged him even deeper into despair. Even during Yunhua's funeral, Yu Zhong secluded himself in isolation training, battling relentless hallucinations and crushing migraines brought on by the art's backlash. Agonized screams echoed through the training chamber as Yu Zhong collapsed under the weight of his pain. Tears filled his eyes as he struggled to accept the loss of Yunhua, haunted by the realization that he had arrived too late. He relived his rage and sorrow endlessly, striking again and again until the walls of the training room were stained with his blood. Yet despite his fractured mental state, he forced himself to endure. He clung to his sanity for one reason alone. He did not want to lose his child. He feared that if the illusions overtook him completely, he might kill his own child with his own hands. Winter arrived, and only then did Cheon Yeowun finally emerge from isolation. When he stepped back into the world, he was no longer the same man. His expression remained stoic, but an icy aura clung to him, and a deep cynicism colored every word and action. He was certain that the one responsible for Yunhua's death belonged to one of the 6 sects. His thoughts inevitably turned to Cheon Yeowun. If Yu Zhong continued to neglect the wives of the 6 sects, Yeowun would be placed in grave danger. When Yu Zhong learned that the child had been prevented from learning martial arts, anger surged through him. Markim confirmed that Lady Hua had personally gone before the women of the 6 sects and sworn that she would never allow her child to study martial arts. Yu Zhong immediately understood the implication. That meant the child was already in danger. Markim confirmed it without hesitation. According to the head physician, young Lord Cheon Yeowun had already been poisoned with microtoxins. Yu Zhong's chest tightened as realization struck. He understood that Yunhua had gone to such lengths to protect their child while he was away at war. Rage and helplessness tore through him, and he questioned what he was supposed to do next. If it had been left to his instincts alone, he would have slaughtered everyone involved without restraint. That very day, Yu Zhong made a vow to himself. He resolved to completely reshape the demonic cult so that the 6 sects would no longer hold the power to serve as its foundation. Frustration twisted his expression as he blamed himself. He believed that everything that had happened was his fault, and that his child had suffered because of him. him. Yuzhong longed to take Yeowun in immediately, to protect him and raise him under his direct care. Yet he knew that doing so would only make it more difficult to uncover the culprit behind Yunhwa's murder. Even as his heart felt as though it were being torn apart, he reached a grim conclusion. He would use Yeowun as bait. Only by doing so could he protect his son, draw out the enemy hidden among the six sects, and ensure that Yeowun would not meet the same tragic fate as Yunhwa. 10 years passed, and the day of the Academy's entrance ceremony arrived. Cheon Yeowun could not completely suppress his nervousness. He deliberately avoided looking at the child, knowing that the moment he did, his resolve would weaken. Yet on that day, he failed. The instant his eyes fell upon the child, he recognized him. The resemblance to Yunhwa was unmistakable. Emotions surged uncontrollably, and tears threatened to surface. Unable to endure it, Yeowun turned away at once, forcing himself to regain composure. He acknowledged that Sir Submeng had taken a liking to the child. Markham confirmed it. Yeowun then ordered that Sir Lee Hameng be informed and instructed not to interfere. He admitted that he could not bear to watch his own son fail the first and second examinations. Markham bowed in obedience and assured him that bodyguards would be dispatched to keep watch over the infirmary. 2 months later, just before the third examination, the Sword Sect finally took the bait. They violated their promise to cease all research into the demonic blood reversal art. The evidence lay in the captured members of the Million Sword Sect, one of the forces affiliated with the two Shadow Sword Sects. Yeowun ordered Submeng to arrest every member of the Million Sword Sect and granted him authority to kill anyone who resisted. 3 years after that, an unknown faction seized control of Zhejiang, creating a major crisis for the cult. In response, Yeowun chose to form an alliance with the righteous faction to eliminate the threat. He believed the matter had to be resolved before Yeowun graduated from the academy. Pressed by urgency, Yeowun feared that the situation could escalate into a massive war like the one that had occurred 15 years earlier. He could not endure the thought of once again failing to protect those he loved. The 6 Berserk Saber warriors proved to be far stronger and more dangerous than any enemy the cult had faced before. When the Elders' forces were unable to end the conflict, Yeowun personally entered the battlefield alongside Markham. That was when he appeared. Yeowun was unable to defeat him. The encounter dragged Yeowun back to the days when he had been a weak young boy, struggling desperately to reach the realm of a mythical master. In just over 10 exchanges, Yeowun had already lost his footing in battle. The man spoke to Cheon Yeowun and stated that he was not the one. Yeowun could not comprehend the meaning behind those words. Soon after, the man launched a decisive attack meant to end his life. At that instant, Yunhwa and Yeowun appeared vividly in Yeowun's mind. Panic and desperation surged through him as he refused to accept death. He realized that if he fell there, his child would be left alone once again. The thought of abandoning his child to solitude in this world was something he could not endure. Dr. Baek Jong-woo's warning echoed clearly within his mind. He remembered being told that the hallucinations following the previous use of the art had lasted an entire month, and that using it again could result in after effects that might not subside so easily. Yet Yeowun had no choice. His eyes trembled as they turned bloodshot red. He rejected the idea of dying there. In the end, Cheon Yeowun activated the Divine Blood Reversal art once more. As a consequence, his memories were completely erased. When he regained awareness, Great Guardian Markham was supporting him, helping him stand. Yeowun felt as though his spirit had been hollowed out. He felt nothing at all and could not recall how the enemy had been defeated. In his numb state, another figure appeared before him and offered support. It was Cheon Yeowun. The brother Yeowun believed to be dead stood there, helping him upright. Yeowun spoke calmly, noting that Yeowun had overexerted himself again and warning him about the danger of collapsing from exhaustion. He emphasized that only Yeowun could set the cult right and urged him not to push himself so far, addressing him as both brother and patriarch. Fragments of memory surfaced within Yeowun's mind. He recalled Yeowun's past promise to always stand by his side. He remembered Cheon Inji's claim that Yeowun was weak, the vow he himself had sworn before the altar of the demonic lord to protect the cult, and the promises he had made to Yunhwa and their child. From this, Yeowun reached a conclusion. Yeowun was right. He had to be the one. He was the one who must maintain balance within the cult. Yeowun stared blankly at Yeowun as awareness slowly returned. He muttered to himself about balance, repeating the words as though anchoring his mind. A twisted realization followed. He accepted that he is being used as a mere chess piece, convincing himself that preserving the balance of the demonic cult was his duty above all else. Clutching his head in pain, Cheon Yeowun suddenly lifted his face. His eyes burned red as madness and resolve intertwined. Shock spread through the great hall as the elders realized the state Cheon Yeowun had fallen into. His eyes were completely bloodshot, and they understood that he was on the verge of activating the demonic blood reversal art within the hall itself. Amid the chaos, a man watched with a twisted grin. He reveled in the fact that his telepathic provocations had succeeded, driving Yuzhong toward total collapse. He desired nothing less than Yuzhong losing himself entirely, slaughtering the minor priest and the chiefs of the sixth sex, and fulfilling his role by turning the Great Hall into a sea of blood. Cheon Yeowun growled as his body began to transform. His muscles swelled grotesquely, tearing through his garments as he rose to his feet. His internal energy spiraled violently around him like a raging vortex, erupting outward as razor-sharp force chi. Everything it touched crumbled apart. Cracks split open across the massive pillars of the Great Hall, and debris rained down like a hailstorm. Elders and sect leaders scattered in panic, scrambling to escape the collapsing structure. At that instant, Cheon Yeowun shot forward like a bolt of lightning. He invoked NANO, directing it to calculate where the falling debris would land, and NANO responded immediately. Yeowun moved with blinding speed, smashing apart most of the falling rocks with precise bursts of force chi before they could strike anyone below. Gratitude rang out as those he protected recognized his actions. Without slowing, Yeowun dashed through the hall and ordered everyone to evacuate to safety at once. Cheon Yeowun roared in madness, declaring that all who betrayed him would face death. Seizing the opening, Yeowun closed the distance in an instant. He grabbed Cheon Yeowun by the head and pressed his other hand firmly against Yuzhong's chest. Without speaking, Yeowun issued a command to NANO, and NANO immediately initiated the process. Lightning surged forth, striking directly into a blood point at the crown of the Lord's head. At the same time, Yeowun poured powerful internal energy into Yuzhong's body, forcibly restraining the energy that was attempting to flow in reverse. Cheon Yeowun convulsed violently as the electric force tore through him. His body trembled uncontrollably as he screamed in agony, his hair and face scorched by the energy coursing through him. After a prolonged struggle, his strength gave out and he collapsed to the ground. The Great Hall fell into stunned silence as everyone stared in disbelief at the sight before them. Yeowun assessed the situation and acknowledged inwardly that it had been fortunate he had analyzed Youngbon's corpse through a replay of its energy resonance. His thoughts returned to Markham's words from the previous night at Five Wise Peak, when Markham had revealed that he had never disclosed this before, but that he had been watching over and protecting Yeowun on numerous occasions. The realization weighed heavily on Yeowun. He struggled to accept it, questioning whether Cheon Yeowun had never seen him as a pawn, but instead as someone he wished to protect. He resolved to hear the truth directly from Yuzhong himself, yet his focus shifted immediately afterward. Yeowun glanced back, and in the next instant, his body blurred as he moved. He appeared directly in front of the man who had been sending telepathic messages to Cheon Yeowun. With crushing force, Yeowun seized the man by the neck and lifted him into the air. Yeowun fixed him with a cold glare and demanded to know who he was. The man struggled violently, gasping as he tried to break free. Shock and fear surged through him as he realized Yeowun had used the swift clone technique. He could not comprehend who Yeowun truly was, nor understand the mysterious energy that had halted the divine blood reversal art while it was charging. Yeowun tightened his grip and repeated his demand. The man choked out a protest, questioning why this was being done to him. At that moment, one of the sect leaders hurriedly spoke up, identifying the man as Yi Bul-Wei, the chief of the Cursed Sword Sect. Yeowun immediately recognized the implication. The Cursed Sword Sect was one of the two Shadow Sword Sects operating under the Sword Sect. Without releasing his grip, Yeowun projected Bul-Wei's own words back into his mind through telepathic transmission. He repeated the command Bul-Wei had sent to the Patriarch, exposing the order to eliminate the traitor, behead his followers, and restore order to the cult. A cold grin formed on Yeowun's face as he pressed further. He questioned whether Bul-Wei was shocked that his telepathic messages had been heard, and accused him of hypocrisy for branding Yeowun a traitor while attempting to feign innocence himself. Panic seized Bul-Wei. He realized that Yeowun had truly heard his telepathic transmissions, and fear surged through him as he understood that a single mistake could unravel the entire plan. Desperation pushed him toward the thought of warning the others immediately. Bul-Wei denied everything aloud, insisting that there had been no telepathic messages. Yeowun responded by tightening his grip, silencing him instantly, and making it clear that Bul-Wei had no right to speak. With the plan exposed and escape impossible, Bul-Wei reached a grim conclusion. He would have to shoulder all the blame so that the others could withdraw from the castle. At that moment, a telepathic message reached him announcing that the plan had failed and ordering him to prepare to fight the minor priest to the death. Bul-Wei screamed in despair. He was fully aware that Yeowun could hear the telepathic transmissions, and yet the message continued. Yeowun jolted in alarm and turned sharply toward the source of the signal, as the voice declared that the others would handle matters there and retreat in the meantime. Yeowun's gaze locked onto a single figure. Near the entrance, palace guard leader Hyun-pa was engaged in combat with Ho-sangwa. In that instant, Bulwi forcibly reversed his energy through specific blood points. His muscles swelled grotesquely, veins bulging across his neck as power surged through him. The sudden eruption of force threw Yeowun's grasp back, breaking free from his hold. Yeowun spoke with cold certainty, stating that such a method would never work. He seized Bulwi's face and released a violent electrical shock. Even so, Bulwi was hurled out of his grasp, skidding backward under the force. He twisted his arm and launched a sharp jab, but Yeowun evaded it cleanly. Yeowun immediately sensed the anomaly. Despite having suppressed Bulwi's 100 meetings point and Jade Hall point, Bulwi was still moving freely. Yeowun recognized that Bulwi was undeniably using the demonic blood reversal art, yet his eyes had not turned red. From this, Yeowun realized that Bulwi's energy was flowing through a completely different pathway. Bulwi watched him with a twisted grin. He acknowledged inwardly that they all possessed hidden techniques of their own. He knew that the true divine blood reversal art had never been taught to the Patriarch or the Sword Sect. The only drawback of his current state was its limited duration, lasting roughly 1 hour. The realization spread through the hall as the sect leaders reacted in shock, recognizing the blood reversal art. Understanding dawned among them as they questioned whether this was the reason Yeowun had attacked Bulwi in the first place. They moved to restrain him. Unarmed yet still formidable, the sect leaders, each a master or supermaster, surrounded Bulwi. 5 of them charged at once. Bulwi evaded their combined assault and counterattacked in a single motion. 2 sect leaders were violently hurled backward. They attempted to recover and defend, but their bodies failed to respond in time. From behind, Muk Yen, the leader of the Sword Illusion sect, struck. His force chi slammed directly into Bulwi's back. The impact barely penetrated. Muk Yen stared in disbelief as his force chi sank no deeper than a fingertip before being repelled by overwhelming energy retention that blasted him away. Bulwi hurled himself toward Yeowun, driven by the knowledge that his state would last only an hour, yet convinced that it was more than enough time to kill him. Blue Force Chi gathered densely around Yi Bulwi's hand, far more massive than anything the other warriors had displayed. Muk Yen shouted a warning, urging the demonic lord to be careful. Yi Bulwi unleashed a sword formation through the Force Chi coating his hand. At the same instant, Black Chi spiraled around Yeowun's arm as the Sky Demon's sword flashed into motion. Yeowun moved like a bolt of lightning and severed Bulwi's arm in a single stroke. The arm, veins grotesquely swollen, slammed into the floor with a heavy thud. Bulwi stared at it in stunned silence before his strength gave out and he collapsed to his knees. Agonizing pain tore through him as screams ripped from his throat, his voice breaking as he fixated on the loss of his arm. Yeowun addressed him coldly, dismissing the injury as nothing more than the loss of a single arm. Rage flared in Bulwi as he demanded to know what Yeowun meant. Yeowun replied with a cruel smile, stating that survival was still possible with nothing more than a head and torso. Bulwi recoiled at the words, condemning Yeowun as monstrous. In a final act of desperation, Bulwi launched himself forward like a missile with his remaining arm, vowing not to let Yeowun escape. Yeowun glanced back without emotion as Bulwi closed the distance. His sword moved in 3 clean arcs. In an instant, Bulwi's remaining limbs were severed in a brutal spray of blood. A river of crimson spilled across the floor as what remained of his body collapsed, reduced to only a head and torso. Bulwi gasped weakly, cursing as disbelief consumed him. His thoughts faltered as he questioned how Yeowun could be so overwhelmingly strong. Accepting that this was the end, he took grim solace in believing that he had bought enough time for Hyunpa to retreat and resolved to end his own life. Before he could act, another body crashed down beside him. It was Hyunpa. Yin Moha stood nearby, calmly sheathing her sword. She reported that she had captured him exactly as ordered. Yeowun issued a command as the demonic lord, ordering the complete suppression of the cursed sword sect's warriors and bodyguards. He granted full authority to kill any who resisted. At once, all the sect leaders bowed deeply in unison and accepted the command without hesitation. With Yeowun's official order given, the sect leaders acted without delay. They rushed out of the Great Hall and immediately began arresting the palace guards. Warriors ranked within the top 200 of the cult spread throughout the palace, conducting a thorough search with swift and efficient progress. Several palace guards still remained inside the hall. They were the 12 strongest warriors directly appointed under the Lord. 4th Elder Cheon Yeowun approached them, Blue Force Chi coiling densely around his his hand. He warned them not to resist. 10 of the warriors promptly dropped to their knees, signaling their surrender. 2 among them hesitated, their expressions stiff with unease. Panic churned within them as they realized their leaders had been overpowered far too easily. Their hesitation did not go unnoticed. Cheon immediately identified them as enemies and charged forward. Left with no other option, one of the 2 resolved to hold Cheon back, while the other moved to assassinate the Lord. Force chi erupted as the first warrior struck toward Cheon to buy time. The second warrior rushed toward the throne, aiming for Cheon Yeowun, who lay unconscious. Markim was checking on him, but the attacker attempted to force his way through and finish the Lord where he lay. The warrior's sword flashed behind Markim. Markim turned coldly and raised his hand. 3 swords that had fallen within the hall lifted into the air at once and shot toward the attacker. The sight stunned the warrior as he realized sword whispering was being used. He managed to deflect one blade, but the remaining 2 pierced straight through his shoulders. The immense force carried him off the ground and pinned his body violently against a pillar. Markim stated calmly that the warrior had gravely underestimated him. At the same time, the warrior engaging Cheon screamed in pain. Cheon formed his fist technique and severed both of the man's arms in a single decisive motion. Cheon let out a sharp sigh, remarking that he had already warned them against such futile resistance. Yeowun's overwhelming power had made everyone else seem weak by comparison, yet those present were still among the top-ranked warriors of the cult. Outside the Great Hall, the situation unfolded in much the same way. Nearly 300 palace guards were stationed throughout the grounds, but not all of them were spies. When the sect leaders charged out to arrest them, confusion spread instantly. The guards shouted in shock, unable to understand why the sect leaders were turning against them or what had gone wrong. Ko Wang-hyun, the leader of the Demon Fist sect, issued a clear command, declaring that the demonic lord had ordered any spies to be killed if they resisted, and that there was no need for mercy. Panic broke out among the guards. Many immediately surrendered, desperately insisting that they were not traitors. As a result, identifying the true spies became far easier. Yi Bulwi lay on the ground, limbless and seething with rage. His family had carried the plan across generations, preparing meticulously for this moment, yet everything had collapsed because of a single man. He recalled the words of the former leader, Yi Burkham, who had said that once the messenger bearing the order appeared, their century-long plan would finally begin. That messenger had indeed come, even forcing them to reveal their hidden identity to Murim, but now the plan was finished. A sharp whistle reached Bulwi's ears from outside. His eyes shifted subtly, as though he had been waiting for that sound all along. Yeowun noticed the change and questioned him. Bulwi laughed bitterly, mocking the idea that Yeowun had truly won. He claimed that although he had failed to kill Yeowun or the remaining sect leaders, he would still take the guardians with him. Yeowun frowned, questioning what he meant. Bulwi revealed his final move. He asked who Yeowun believed was guarding the imprisoned guardians and declared that the signal just sent would result in their execution. He claimed that the 2 guardians who served Yeowun would already be dead, their bodies lying cold on the prison floor, and laughed cruelly at the thought. Yeowun, however, showed no concern. He calmly shook his head and dismissed the threat as insignificant. Bulwi was left confused by the reaction. At that same moment, within a prison located southeast of the Lord's palace, a small cell held 2 middle-aged men bound tightly to their chairs. They were left guardian Lee Ha-meng and right guardian Sub-meng. Lee Ha-meng's thoughts churned with disbelief. He could not accept that the patriarch had issued such an order and questioned whether Cheon Yeowun had lost his sanity. He had no idea what was happening outside the prison, but he suspected that it was not just the 2 of them who had been confined. The elders who assisted the minor priest might also have been imprisoned. More than anything, he feared that the minor priest himself could be in danger. Sub-meng spent hours concentrating on his internal energy, painstakingly forcing out the long needle embedded in his body that sealed his blood point. The process was slow and exhausting, his breathing growing heavy as time passed. Ha-meng observed his efforts closely and understood that such a task was far from easy. Sub-meng gathered his strength again and focused intensely on the blood point, forcing his energy forward once more. A palace guard noticed the movement and shouted in alarm as he struck the iron bars. Ha-meng rebuked him sharply, questioning how a guardian could not endure being tied up for a short while. Sub-meng followed along immediately, snapping back and mocking Ha-meng loudly, deliberately escalating the argument. He reminded him to think about where they were before provoking a fight. Ha-meng retorted that if Sub-meng could not stay still, he should simply go to sleep. The guard grew irritated at their bickering, muttered dismissively, and turned away, convinced that the 2 were merely quarreling among themselves. At that moment, a faint whistling sound echoed from outside the prison. The palace guards' expressions changed instantly. Grins spread across their faces as though they had been waiting for that signal, and they drew their swords. Submeng panicked as he realized what was happening and shouted in alarm when he saw the guards preparing to strike. Before they could act, a sudden explosion rocked the entire cell. The guards spun around in shock, shouting demands to know who was there. A powerful blow sent one of the guards flying into the prison wall. Hameng stared in disbelief as he recognized the towering figure who had entered. It was Ko Wang-hul, the first sword of Cheon Yeowun's forces. As the remaining guards rushed to attack him, another figure burst in, striking them down with swift, precise kicks. It was Baekji, the second sword of Yeowun's forces. He stormed through the narrow corridor, his movements too fast for the palace guards to react as they swung their blades clumsily in the confined space. Shouts rang out as more guards poured into the prison, charging toward the intruders. Baekji scoffed, making it clear that the guards still had no understanding of the situation they were in. He called out to Wang Hul as he surged forward. Wang Hul responded with explosive enthusiasm, laughing loudly as he joined the assault, while Baekji snapped back in irritation at being barked orders. Meanwhile, back in the Great Hall, Yeowun spoke calmly, making it clear that Bulwi still failed to grasp the reality of the situation. With 3 sect elders standing behind him, Bulwi's position was already lost, and it was Bulwi himself who should have been afraid. Bulwi's thoughts turned desperate. He realized that Yeowun was keeping him alive only to uncover the true mastermind behind everything. To Bulwi, death was preferable to capture and torture. He resolved to reverse his energy, trigger an explosion, and end his own life. Yinmoha sensed the danger and urgently warned Yeowun. Bulwi focused his energy inward. His body swelled unnaturally as if it were about to burst apart. He laughed wildly, convinced that Yeowun was attempting the same suppression again and mocking the effort as meaningless. Even as his body strained, he declared that Yeowun should not be relieved, claiming that the crisis was not truly over and that there were places beyond the reach of Yeowun's sect. Yeowun did not respond. Instead, his hand passed straight through Bulwi's face, and Bulwi caught sight of a faint, unfamiliar light. Yeowun's movements became swift and precise as his hand swept across Bulwi's body, the purpose unclear. Bulwi struggled to speak, insisting that nothing would work, even as his body reacted violently. Then electricity surged through his body. Bulwi convulsed violently as unbearable pain twisted through him. The sensation was as if his entire body were being torn apart from the inside. His screams echoed until his consciousness finally gave way. Smoke seeped from his mouth as his hair and flesh were scorched by the energy. Minutes later, Yeowun struck him sharply, forcing him back to awareness. Bulwi awoke screaming, clutching at the pain burning across his face. Confusion overtook him as he realized he was still alive. Yeowun looked down on him with clear disdain. He confirmed that the method had worked and coldly reminded Bulwi of what he had just claimed about his sect. Bulwi cursed under his breath, filled with bitterness and frustration. After the situation in the Great Hall was fully resolved, 4th Elder Gyeongjah and 6th Elder Mong-o mobilized their forces and moved immediately toward the manor of the Vengeance Sword Sect. Given the state of emergency, they planned to seal every exit and storm the estate, believing escape would be impossible. However, by the time they arrived, the eastern manor of the Vengeance Sword Sect was already engulfed in flames. Orders rang out to contain the fire and prevent it from spreading further, but the heat was overwhelming. The entire estate had been soaked in oil beforehand, ensuring that the inferno consumed everything in its path. From outside the blazing grounds, it was clear that they had arrived too late. 3 days later, within the office, Markham delivered his report. He stated that although the fire at the Vengeance Sword Sect had been successfully suppressed, there were no survivors. Most of the bodies had been completely incinerated, leaving behind only faint traces. From the evidence, it was assumed that the remaining members had taken their own lives. Everything indicated that they had prepared thoroughly, ensuring they could erase all remnants at any moment. Yeowun asked about the progress of the investigation into Yibul Wee and the Sword Demon sect. Markham explained that the Left Guardian had been personally interrogating both Hyunpa and Yibul Wee, but little had been uncovered so far. Furthermore, all individuals within the Sword Demon sect who had ties to the Vengeance Sword sect were found dead. Everyone carrying the bloodline of the Sword Demon sect had been arrested. Their battle squads were completely disbanded and placed on inactive duty. Among the Palace Guard warriors, 14 were identified as members of the Vengeance Sword sect. Official records listed only 5, but 9 had been added recently. Yeowun acknowledged the report quietly. At that moment, the guards announced that the 11th Elder was requesting an audience. Yeowun granted permission at once. Hwan Yi entered and bowed deeply, formally paying his respects to the demonic lord and stating that he had come to report important findings. Yeowun noted his swift return and questioned it. Markim observed that Hwan Yi was wearing a different face mask than before. Hwan Yi responded lightly, remarking that he could not rest while Yeowun was working tirelessly for the sake of the cult. Yeowun asked whether the report concerned the pursuit. Hwan Yi confirmed it. He explained that 3 days earlier, while cleaning up the aftermath of their clash with the Vengeance Sword Sect squad, they discovered that 3 to 4 corpses were missing, including that of the sect leader. As a result, a pursuit squad was immediately dispatched. Using the Darkness Sect's information network, they conducted a search across Fujian Province and Jiangxi Province. Earlier that day, a letter had arrived from the northern branch of Fujian Province, signaling a new development. Yeowun asked whether the corpses had been found. Hwan Yi confirmed that their traces had been discovered. Reinforcements were requested from the Wuhan branch, and the pursuit continued. However, during the chase, all members of the pursuit squad went missing. He offered his apologies for the failure. Yeowun accepted it calmly, stating that it could not be helped and instructed him to move on to the next matter. Hwan Yi expressed his gratitude for the understanding. Yeowun walked over to the map mounted on the wall and studied it closely. He identified the northern region of Wumin village of Fujian Province and concluded that the targets must have crossed over into Zhejiang Province. Hwan Yi confirmed that this matched their own assessment. Yeowun's thoughts deepened. He recalled the banquet with the Murim Alliance, where the palace guards had been responsible for inspecting the wine. That responsibility directly connected the Vengeance Sword Sect to the incident. Yeowun stated that there was a strong possibility the Supreme Saber of the Six Gates sect was involved. He asked Markim to confirm whether the Vengeance Sword Sect had been absorbed from the outside world roughly 60 years ago. Markim confirmed it. He explained that it had happened during the prime of the Supreme Heavenly Demon, who had defeated the sect, converted them, and incorporated them into the demonic cult. Yeowun continued to ponder the matter. He questioned why they had waited for such a long time to act. The Supreme Saber of the six martial arts sects had only appeared in the Murim for a single month, and the gap between their appearances did not align logically. What troubled Yeowun most were Yi Bulwee's final words before attempting to end his own life. Bulwee had implied that their sect's influence extended far beyond the demonic cult, reaching throughout the Zhonghu. That statement suggested that the true force behind everything was not the Vengeance Sword Sect alone. A realization struck Yeowun. There had to be a way to make Bulwee speak. Markim noticed the shift in Yeowun's expression and asked what he had realized. Yeowun answered with a faint smile. He instructed the Great Guardian to prepare immediately, stating that they needed to visit the demonic physician. Later that day, Yeowun arrived at the medical infirmary together with Markim. Baek Jongwoo bowed deeply and paid his respects to the demonic lord. Yeowun acknowledged his efforts and praised him for his work. Jongwoo immediately lowered himself further, stating that he had only carried out his duty as the chief physician. He admitted that his own medical techniques were insufficient, as he had been unable to determine exactly what had happened to Cheon Yeowun, and declared that he deserved punishment for the failure. Yeowun let out a low sound. For 3 days, Cheon Yeowun had remained in the medical chamber under the demon physician's care, yet there had been no improvement. Yeowun's gaze shifted to the unconscious patriarch. Cheon Yeowun suddenly began to wail and sob, calling out a name repeatedly, pleading as though speaking to someone who was no longer there. He shook his head violently and kept muttering refusal as if he were under attack. His eyes showed no recognition at all, not toward Yeowun nor toward Markim standing nearby. Yeowun told Jongwoo not to blame himself. He explained that he had come for a different reason and asked whether the drug previously discovered in the banquet hall had been fully analyzed. Jongwoo confirmed that the substance containing opium poppy had been completely examined. He questioned why Yeowun was asking about it now. Yeowun did not answer, but his expression revealed clear intent. Soon after, within the Great Hall, all elders and sect leaders gathered once again. Those who had been dispatched outside the castle had returned, restoring the hall to its full presence. The guards announced the demonic lord's arrival. Voices rang out in unison, praising the glory of the demonic cult. Yeowun acknowledged them quietly as he stepped forward. He paused when his eyes fell upon a throne that had not been present earlier that day. It was not the lord's throne, but one clearly prepared for him. The intent behind it was unmistakable. Cheon smiled inwardly. He reflected that their alliance with Yeowun had begun as a necessity born of crisis, acknowledging him as the heavenly demon only because the situation demanded it. Now that the chaos had settled, he had no intention of offering support without extracting something in return. No matter what followed, they intended to secure the greatest possible advantage from Yeowun in this very hall. Yeowun shook his head and let out a quiet laugh. He lightly brushed his hand against the newly prepared throne throne, then walked past it without hesitation and seated himself on the Lord's throne instead. As confusion spread, someone began to speak, noting that the demonic Lord's seat was meant to be elsewhere. Before the words could be finished, the throne placed beside the Lord's seat began to crack. In the next instant, it shattered completely with a sharp, resounding crash. Yeowun wore a smug smile as he made it clear that there were no other seats. The three elders were left speechless. They leaned back into their chairs, unsettled by what they had just witnessed. They realized inwardly that Yeowun must have injected his energy into the throne the moment he touched it. Though they found the act reckless, they restrained their reactions for the time being, recognizing that revising the positions of the elders had now become the most urgent matter. Cheon attempted to regain control of the meeting and moved to formally begin proceedings, announcing the first agenda item. Before he could continue, Markham interrupted and proposed that the details of the Patriarch's coronation ceremony be discussed first. The three elders were taken aback by the sudden shift. Hang So-yu immediately objected, stating that such a matter had not been included in the agenda. Young-ja followed, arguing that it was unacceptable to introduce a topic that had never been agreed upon for discussion. Cheon attempted to calm the situation, suggesting that the coronation could be addressed later, after the current patriarch regained consciousness. As he spoke, he tried to draw agreement from the other sect leaders. At the same time, bitterness weighed heavily on him. He felt the sting of their diminished authority, realizing how powerless they had become, forced to rely on others rather than commanding the situation themselves. Inwardly, Cheon acknowledged the difference. Yeowun was unlike the current patriarch, who had ascended solely because of the supreme patriarch's decree. Yeowun had steadily built his influence and support since his days at the demonic academy. In contrast, the elders had lost half of the 6 great sects. The poison sect had been completely annihilated, while the sword sect and shadow sect had been disbanded, their members scattered across various factions. Great Guardian Markham calmly asked whether only the 3 elders opposed discussing the matter. At once, the 3 turned their attention to 6th Elder Mong-o. They needed his support to secure the required number of elders to block the topic. Mong-o, however, deliberately turned away, refusing to meet their gaze. Sama-chuk felt quiet satisfaction. He knew that the effort spent persuading Mong-o after the elders' meeting the previous night had been worthwhile. Once Mong-o learned that young Lord Chun was serving as the acting patriarch, convincing him had not been difficult. Cheon's thoughts darkened as despair crept into his eyes. He realized that if this continued, they would lose their advantage in voting power among the senior elders. The grim possibility surfaced that they might be left with no choice but to rely on the smaller sects. Markham then addressed the sect leaders directly, asking whether any of them agreed with the objection. Jo Sang, the sect leader of the 5 Dragon Blade sect, voiced his agreement with the 3 elders. One by one, other sect leaders rose in support, but the situation quickly became clear. Only 35 sect leaders stood. The 3 elders' expressions hardened immediately. Every sect leader who had risen belonged to sects directly controlled by the 3 major sects. The realization struck them that fear of their authority was fading. With the sword sect disbanded, their influence had sharply diminished. In the past, even independent sects had aligned themselves with the 6 sects, but that loyalty no longer existed. At that moment, Cheon stepped forward, knelt before Yeowun, and bowed deeply. He formally acknowledged Yeowun's authority and power as the demonic lord, but asserted that the great demonic cult had always been founded upon tradition, law, and order. He stated that the current patriarch had clearly been manipulated by traitors, and argued that it was only right to wait for the patriarch to awaken and proceed in accordance with long-established customs. Moon-yun observed the scene in silence. He understood that Cheon was attempting to cling to the authority of the current patriarch. He also recognized that prolonged internal conflict would bring no benefit to the cult, and he suspected that the acting patriarch would not take this maneuver lightly. Sama-chuk raised his voice, declaring that the demonic physician had already confirmed the current patriarch's condition had shown no improvement at all. He stated openly that he understood what the 3 elders were trying to do, but emphasized that with the threat of the supreme saber of the 6 martial arts sect looming, the cult could not afford to leave the patriarch's position vacant. Cheon immediately countered, insisting that this only strengthened his argument. If the demonic physician was unable to cure the current patriarch, then they should summon the divine physician if necessary, and proceed only after Cheon Yeowun had fully recovered. He stressed that Cheon Yeowun was still their rightful leader, and that ignoring the established procedures for abdication would render the palace guard meetings meaningless. Sama-chuk frowned as he grasped their true intent. The 3 elders were unwilling to relinquish their interests. They were clearly stalling for time, hoping to rebuild the influence their sects had lost. Cheon then announced his decision. He declared that he would take his leave and would not attend any further palace guard meetings until the current patriarch regained consciousness. As the three elders moved toward the exit, the atmosphere within the hall turned heavy. Great Guardian Markham raised his hand, signaling the warriors to block their path. Yeowun stopped him calmly and ordered that they be allowed to leave. He stated that this outcome was preferable, as it made their enemies and allies unmistakably clear. Later that same day, after dinner, the gazebo behind the Hall of Feast was illuminated. Tables were laid out with an abundance of delicacies and liquor. Hang Soyu expressed disbelief that the opposing side had initiated negotiations themselves and praised Elder Bu, stating that his strategy had worked. Gyeongja admitted his own surprise, noting that most of their demands had been accepted. He remarked that the process was going so smoothly that it almost felt unsettling, as though it could be a trap. Cheon cautioned them that while it likely was not a trap, they still needed to be wary of one thing in particular: the food and drink. Gyeongja agreed, stating that there was no harm in exercising caution. Yeowun arrived shortly afterward with Markham and apologized for being late. The gathered elders and leaders immediately stood and bowed deeply, expressing their respect and gratitude to the demonic lord for preparing such a lavish feast for them. Cheon offered a drink and personally poured liquor into Yeowun's glass. Yeowun accepted it without hesitation and drank. Hang Soyu observed quietly and concluded that nothing had been added to the food. With that concern eased, she believed they could enjoy the small banquet. Gyeongja's thoughts turned pragmatic. The first through third elder positions were currently vacant, and securing them would grant control over both the military and internal affairs of the cult. Those positions had to be claimed. Cheon too was calculating. Dividing the vested interests of 6 elders among just 3 of them was far more favorable than expected. Even the patriarchal position, monopolized by the Shadow Sect and Sword Sect for the past 100 years, could eventually fall into the hands of their own descendants. The 3 of them shared the same unspoken thought. Yeowun must be wary of their fighting forces, otherwise he would not have gone to such lengths to prepare a banquet this lavish. As the feast formally began, a cook brought in a freshly slaughtered bull and began preparing it over a roaring bonfire. Gyeongja remarked on the sight of freshly cut beef being grilled over charcoal, while Hang Soyu expressed anticipation for its taste. The atmosphere gradually softened as rich food and liquor were shared freely. Cheon laughed loudly and remarked that it would have been far better if such a feast had been prepared earlier. With that, he moved to begin the negotiations. Yeowun stopped him calmly and suggested that they first try a delicacy. Cheon questioned what delicacy he meant. Yeowun explained that it was something he had eaten not long ago, a well-known delicacy from Beijing. Since they were attempting to establish friendly relations, he stated his intention to treat all of them to it. Yeowun rose from his seat and walked over to the freshly butchered bull. After exchanging a few words with the cook, he took the knife himself and cut into the bull's chest. He reached inside and pulled out the heart. It was still warm, faintly pulsing, steam rising from its surface. Unease flickered among those watching. Yeowun carried the heart to the table, placed it on a plate, and sliced it into portions. Hang Soyu frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the sight of raw meat. The cook returned with prepared seasonings. Yeowun explained that it could be eaten with a light dip of salt, but that it would taste far better when dipped into the sauce he had prepared himself. Gyeongja reacted with excitement, noting that it had been a long time since he had seen such a dish. Cheon, meanwhile, felt a trace of revulsion, realizing that Yeowun truly had eaten all manner of things. Gyeongja acted first. He picked up a piece, dipped it into the sauce, and ate it without hesitation. The taste immediately impressed him, and his delight showed plainly. Cheon followed. Though he had expected it to taste good, the flavor exceeded his expectations. Hang Soyu disliked the faint scent of blood and found it unpleasant, yet she still ate a piece out of respect. Afterward, Yeowun poured liquor into his glass and drank before speaking again. He suggested that they begin the discussion now. Laughter followed, and agreement was voiced. This was the moment they had been waiting for. Though they were unsure how far Cheon Yeowun intended to push things, they knew they had to extract as much as possible. But Cheon was about to state the conditions they had already agreed upon among themselves. Yeowun spoke first. He stated that before anything else, he would present his own conditions. Confusion crossed Cheon's face as he questioned what Yeowun meant by conditions. Yeowun responded coldly, stating that negotiations were about aligning the desires of both sides. Cheon accepted this and urged him to continue. Yeowun then declared his first condition: the complete abolition of the long-standing system of the 6 great sects that had been upheld as tradition. Shock rippled across Cheon's face as he questioned questioned what Yeowun was saying. Yeowun cut him off with a sharp glare, stating that he was not finished speaking. The expressions of the three elders hardened. After a brief pause, they agreed to let him continue. Yeowun announced his second condition. He declared that the existing elder system would be revised and returned to the traditional principle of earning one's position through strength. From that point onward, the ranks of the elders would be determined solely by how strong they were. The elders were struck with shock at his words. Yeowun continued with his third condition. He stated that every sect within the cult would be permitted to maintain only a single troop. Any additional combat groups currently under their control would be dissolved and absorbed into the centralized troop operated directly by the cult. The moment the third condition was revealed, the tension snapped. Cheon slammed his palm onto the table. At the same time, Great Guardian Markim drew his sword and leveled it at his neck. Cheon showed no fear and glared directly at Yeowun, demanding to know the meaning behind this. Yeowun responded calmly, feigning innocence, stating that he was merely laying out his conditions for a friendly negotiation. Cheon shouted in outrage, declaring that this could not be called a negotiation at all, but an open declaration of hostility. Yeowun replied that precisely because he did not wish to turn them into enemies, he had chosen to meet them openly instead of summoning them to a sealed guest room within the inner fortress. He reminded them that he had ordered all guards and guardians to stand down and had come with only Great Guardian Markim at his side. Hang Soyu protested, questioning how such conditions could possibly be considered reasonable, stating outright that Yeowun was stripping the three sects of all their power. Cheon followed, reminding Yeowun that their combined fighting forces were stationed outside the inner fortress. Yeowun acknowledged this calmly, noting that it had been done at their own request prior to the negotiations. Cheon rose from his seat in frustration and declared that those forces represented nearly 20% of the cult's total military strength. He questioned whether Yeowun believed the cult could withstand the supreme saber of the Six Martial Arts sect, let alone the Orthodox Murim Alliance and the Unorthodox Alliance, if those forces were lost. Markim immediately glared at him, rebuking him for daring to threaten the demonic lord. Yeowun exhaled slowly and remarked that, as expected, it was difficult to speak to them politely. The sudden shift in his tone caused all three elders to stiffen. His gaze turned cold as he issued a single command. He ordered them to kneel. The three elders were left stunned and attempted to resist. In the next instant, agonizing pain seized their chests. Their bodies convulsed as if something invisible were crushing their hearts from within. They screamed as the pain surged through them, desperately trying to raise their internal energy to defend themselves. The agony intensified, tearing through their bodies and stomachs until they could no longer endure it. The moment all three elders dropped to their knees, the pain vanished as suddenly as it had begun. Cheon's face flushed red with rage as he shouted, demanding to know what had been done to them. Yeowun answered with a smile, revealing that it was parasite poison, a toxin perfectly suited for people whose minds were filled with corrupt intentions. Shock ran through the three elders. Their eyes trembled as they recognized the poison. It was a parasitic toxin known to remain dormant within the body until activated, at which point it would turn violently against its host. Yeowun revealed how it had been administered. The poison had first been fed to the bull, allowing the parasites to settle within its heart. That same heart was what the three elders had consumed moments earlier. Agonizing pain surged again as Gyeongja attempted to expel the parasite using his internal energy. The backlash was immediate and devastating, sending him rolling across the ground as he screamed in torment. Seeing him on the brink of death from the pain, the other two elders lost all courage to resist and did not dare attempt the same. Yeowun explained calmly that the poison had been personally created by the founding heavenly demon Chun Ma. It could only be controlled through heavenly demon energy. Any attempt to disobey Yeowun's control or threaten him would result in a slow and excruciating death. Cheon felt a crushing realization settle in. He believed himself prepared, yet he had been completely ensnared. Yeowun then remarked that he had forgotten to mention the fourth condition. Despair filled Cheon as he questioned what the final condition could be. Yeowun stated that he would require offerings in exchange for accepting them under his rule. Unease spread across the three elders as Yeowun's smile deepened. For the sake of maintaining a friendly relationship, Yeowun demanded the arms of each of the current lord's wives. Color drained from their faces at the horrifying demand. Later that night, Yeowun sat calmly in a chair before the desk inside the lord's office. Resting on the table were two severed right arms, heavily treated with medicine for preservation. Yeowun reflected coldly. He had expected the elders to possess at least some shred of pride, yet they had chosen their own lives without hesitation. Elder Ja had not needed to spill the blood of his relatives, as Lady Ja of the loyal sect was already dead, but Yeowun knew that if pushed further, even he would sacrifice anything to save himself. Yeowun acknowledged that if circumstances allowed, he would eliminate them all immediately. However, given the cult's current fighting strength, the most effective course was to control them with parasite poison and fracture the military power of the three sects. He wondered if this was the same burden former lords had carried. If internal enemies could not be removed due to fear of weakening the cult, then only one solution remained. He would expand the cult's fighting force until their existence was no longer necessary. He would cultivate new martial masters and purge the old ones, and he judged that it would not take long. Time passed, and the sun eventually rose. As Yeowun continued contemplating his future plans, a knock sounded at the office door. A voice announced that it was time for him to don the formal robe. Yeowun acknowledged quietly and rose from his chair. It was a cold winter afternoon. The sun stood high in a clear blue sky without a single cloud. It was an ideal day for a monumental occasion, the coronation of Cheon Yeowun as patriarch and as the heavenly demon. Countless cultists filled the courtyard before the Lord's palace. Nearly every member of the demonic cult within the castle had gathered for the event. Guardians pushed the crowd back, shouting for them to make room, while the cultists protested that they could not move any farther. Then, from atop the palace walls, deep drums began to thunder. It was the signal that the ceremony had begun. Excited murmurs rippled through the crowd as realization spread. The moment they had been waiting for had finally arrived. A long red velvet carpet stretched across the courtyard. On both sides of it, the leaders of the cult stood in formal attire, lined up in silence as they awaited the ceremony. Ko Wang-hul stared ahead with amazement, realizing that their master was about to become the Lord. Baek-ji and the others beside him nodded in quiet agreement. Baek-ji reflected on how it felt as though only yesterday the battle of the young lords at the demonic academy had taken place. Sama-chuk expressed regret that Hobom could not witness the coronation up close. He recalled how excited Hobom had been when the ceremony was first decided, and how disappointed he now felt watching from afar. Wang-hul agreed, knowing how deeply Hobom had wanted to see the ceremony firsthand. Baek-ji acknowledged that it could not be helped, as only wardens and those of higher rank were permitted to stand on the stage. Soon after, an announcement rang out, calling for silence as the coronation ceremony was about to begin. Murmurs spread through the gathered followers as they noticed a figure standing on the stage. The man wore a blue robe and held a torch in his hand. As everyone focused their gaze, the man turned toward them. Shock rippled through Yeowun's followers as recognition struck. It was Hobom. For a moment, everyone was left speechless. Then the realization set in that there had been no reason to feel sorry after all. Laughter followed, and Baek-ji and Ko Wang-hul laughed openly as the tension eased. At that moment, another drumbeat echoed from the palace walls, accompanied by the blare of a horn. The gates of the inner palace slowly opened, and a figure emerged. Great Guardian Markham stepped forward, wearing his mask and carrying a jade medallion engraved with the authority of the heavenly demon. Behind him, two female servants followed, holding a small box that contained a crown. At once, elders, clan leaders, and warriors fell to the ground and shouted in unison, praising the demonic cult. The cry surged outward, and the countless cultists gathered beyond the courtyard echoed it without delay, their voices rising together in a single thunderous proclamation. Markim stepped onto the stage, raised the jade medallion high above his head, and proclaimed the heavenly demon's order to the gathered cultists. In response, waves of voices thundered back, proclaiming glory to the demonic cult. He then declared the beginning of the coronation of the Lord of the great demonic cult. The courtyard erupted as cheers roared through the entire stronghold, shaking the air itself. A long, resounding horn echoed. From the entrance of the inner palace, Cheon Yeowun appeared. His long hair flowed behind him, his pale face calm and composed. He was dressed in a formal black robe embroidered with a golden dragon, and he began walking down the red carpet that connected the palace to the stage. As he advanced, every one of his followers bowed deeply. They congratulated him from the depths of their hearts, acknowledging him as their cult leader. Mun-ku, clad in a red formal dress that accentuated her beauty, congratulated him as well, realizing that from this moment onward, she could no longer address him as a young lord. Yeowun met her gaze and offered a gentle smile in response. Right Guardian Submang grinned proudly, satisfied that the cult leader standing before them was his own disciple. Left Guardian Hameng responded with visible jealousy, clearly tired of having that fact flaunted before him. As Yeowun continued forward, surrounded by the reverent gazes of countless warriors, the scene became overwhelmingly majestic. With each step along the carpet toward the stage, memories and resolve flowed through his mind. He thought of his mother and acknowledged that he finally possessed the power needed to make those responsible answer for their sins. He vowed to transform the demonic cult so that tragedies like the ones of the past would never occur again. The moment Cheon Yeowun ascended the stage, the courtyard exploded with renewed cheers. The joy of the cultists surged surged upward, marking the dawn of a new era for the demonic cult. Markham stepped before Yeowun and formally proclaimed that Cheon Yeowun, who would become the 24th leader of the demonic cult, was to receive the heavenly demon authority. Yeowun knelt on one knee and bowed deeply, formally accepting the heavenly demon authority as a descendant of the great heavenly demon divine cult. At Markham's command, Hobom, who was holding the lit torch, moved forward. His hands trembled violently as he approached. Yeowun observed him quietly, recognizing Hobom as his very first subordinate, someone who had trusted him unwaveringly regardless of circumstance. Hobom's eyes filled with tears as he bowed, overcome by emotion. He declared that he would never forget this moment. Yeowun acknowledged that he would remember it as well. Yeowun took the torch from Hobom and approached the great ceremonial brazier. He ignited it, and the flame that had not burned in nearly 20 years burst to life in a vivid blue hue. This sacred flame, passed down since the founding of the demonic cult, was known for burning blue instead of red when truly awakened. Yeowun brought both arms to his chest and knelt fully, voicing the sacred vow recorded in the demonic cult's holy scripture. He dedicated his life to the sacred flame, renounced attachment to life and death, pledged to walk his path without wavering, and declared his resolve to abandon both happiness and sorrow, viewing those who lived bound by worry with pity. Markham then invoked the heavenly demon authority and formally bestowed upon Yeowun the title of heavenly demon. As the current lord and young lord, Cheon Yeowun was declared the 24th cult leader and was ordered to receive the crown. Yeowun lowered himself once more onto one knee, bowed his head, and closed his eyes, ready to receive the crown. As he waited, he sensed footsteps approaching the stage. The presence felt unfamiliar. The person carried no martial aura, no trace of cultivated internal energy. The man stopped before Yeowun and gently placed the crown upon his head. Yeowun opened his eyes and looked up. It was Guard Jang. Tears streamed down his face as he smiled warmly. His teeth, once shattered, had been restored through implant techniques that Yeowun himself had requested from Jongmeng and Osunong. Guard Jang congratulated him sincerely, his voice trembling, and spoke of Lady Hua smiling upon him from the heavens. Tears slid down Yeowun's cheek. He immediately understood. This was a gift prepared quietly by his subordinates during the preparations for the coronation. Yeowun embraced Guard Jang tightly, expressing his gratitude, acknowledging that his subordinates had given him the greatest gift he could have received. He then rose to his feet upon the stage, the crown resting firmly upon his head. As he extended his hand, the black metal that covered both of his arms scattered apart, then converged once more, assembling into the form of a sword. A radiant black blade took shape in midair. It was the Sky Demon Sword. A wave of awe swept through the courtyard. The cultists erupted as they recognized the legendary weapon. Yeowun grasped the floating sword and raised it high into the sky. The courtyard exploded with thunderous cheers as voices overlapped endlessly. The cultists roared praise for the demonic cult, their fervor shaking the air itself. And thus, the second generation heavenly demon and the 24th cult leader was born. In later years, historians of Murim would record this day as the moment a demon god emerged from the demonic cult. As the harsh winter receded, spring arrived across the 10,000 Great Mountains. Time passed swiftly, and 3 months had already gone by since Cheon Yeowun rose as the cult leader. In that short span, the heavenly demon divine cult underwent sweeping changes. The first major reform was the approval of a new policy limiting each sect to a single troop, with all remaining fighting forces placed directly under the cult's command. Though objections arose, the policy gained strong support as it ensured equality of power among the sects. Yeowun made his stance clear, stating that survival belonged to the fittest, and that skill and strength were the most vital principles of the cult. In accordance with this doctrine, sect leaders, as representatives of their sects, were assigned either a troop or a squad based on their rank. This system created opportunities for smaller sects, while forcing the established high-ranking sects to continue striving lest they be overtaken. The emphasis on strength extended far beyond sect hierarchy alone. 2 months after Yeowun's coronation, a pivotal opportunity emerged with the announcement of a tournament to select new elders. The event was designed not only to appoint new elders, but also to determine the rankings of the existing ones. To participate, a martial artist needed to have reached the ultimate supreme peak. Previously, only those at the evolutionary level could qualify for elderhood, but the requirement was lowered, as it was unlikely that many new evolutionary masters would appear in the first tournament. The tournament was not limited strictly to internal candidates. In total, 45 individuals met the criteria and registered. Of them, 32 advanced past the preliminary rounds. Among Among the participants were martial masters who had remained hidden until now, the most notable being Mong Mu, the first son of Mong O, the leader of the Dream Sword sect. The revelation shocked many. A single sect possessing two evolutionary martial masters was unprecedented. Mong Mu quickly proved why he stood apart. He had been the most talented member of the last graduating class of the Demonic Arts Academy and had spent 5 years at war on the southern front of Guizhou province, a region plagued by constant conflict. Through countless life and death battles, he gained profound enlightenment in martial arts, forging his strength through blood, survival, and relentless combat. The second individual to draw attention was Young Danhwa, the leader of the eastern branch in Henan province. Having reached the true evolutionary level, Young Danhwa was originally from the main cult, but had voluntarily moved to Henan out of his love for the battlefield. When the front lines grew quiet due to the alliance with the Orthodox Miram Alliance, he gradually lost interest. However, the emergence of the Supreme Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect reignited his fighting spirit, pulling him back into the flow of turbulent events. The third person was someone personally recommended by the Great Guardian. Markham informed Yeowun of a man named Su Dung from the historical sword sect who had been banished to Henan Island for 15 years. Yeowun learned that Su Dung was well known among the elders. The historical sword sect had originally been responsible for recording the official history of the cult, but the shadow sect repeatedly interfered with and distorted those records. Unable to endure the manipulation any longer, Su Dung had led his entire sect in a night ambush against the shadow sect. The attempt failed due to a spy planted within his own ranks. The shadow sect leader, unwilling to sacrifice his own people, reported the incident directly to the cult leader. Because Su Dung was fiercely loyal to the cult and had always viewed the preservation of its true history as sacred, he surrendered immediately to the palace guard. The six great sects demanded his execution, but Cheon Yeowun deliberately spared him. Instead of crippling his martial arts, Yeowun banished Su Dung to Henan Island, intending to use him one day as a hidden blade against the six great sects. After hearing this, Yeowun decided to exercise his authority as cult leader and lifted Su Dung's banishment, ordering the palace guard to deliver the message without delay. Thus, after waiting 15 long years, Su Dung finally returned to the main cult, ready to receive the cult leader's command. Like new waves pushing aside the old, the return of such figures signaled the arrival of a new era. With the rise of the second heavenly demon, the demonic cult entered a period of transformation. The tournament for the elder positions was held soon after, and with it, every ranking within the cult was completely overturned. The shadow sect and the sword sect vanished from the stage of history. Cheon Yeowun, the saber sect leader who had once believed no one could rival him, was defeated in the second round and failed to advance to the higher ranks. Su Dung of the historical sword sect overcame Yin Moha, who had mastered the sword demon's 24 demonic sword techniques and claimed the position of first elder. During his 15 years of banishment, Su Dung had relentlessly honed his martial arts, eventually reaching the ultimate evolutionary peak. With his rise, a new hierarchy of elders was established. Yin Moha became the second elder of the demonic sword sect, Moon Yun the third elder of the demonic dragon palm sect, Young Danhwa the fourth elder of the northern sun martial sect, Butcher Young the fifth elder of the saber sect, Mong Mu the sixth elder of the dream sword sect, Huan Yi the seventh elder of the flying phantom sect, Mong O the eighth elder of the dream sword sect, Sama Yi the ninth elder of the warrior dance sect, Gyung Ja the 10th elder of the stealth sect, Hang Soyu the 11th elder of the musician sect. Gu Chu Young of the nine gate sect was appointed as the 12th elder due to his outstanding performance, despite not having yet reached the evolutionary level. For the first time in 500 years, a fundamental transformation occurred. During the tournament assembly, Cheon Yeowun proposed a radical reform. The elder rankings would henceforth be decided through a tournament held every 5 years. This change forced the current elders to continuously improve themselves and sent a clear message to all sects that anyone could rise to an executive position through strength alone. The system of competition extended beyond the elders. Yeowun reinforced the palace guard by dividing it into 6 divisions, appointing his 6 swords to compete against one another. Most warriors within these divisions were former academy members personally taken in by Yeowun, with the sole exception that their supreme commander was the former senior instructor Ho Jin Chang. Amid all these sweeping reforms, the guardians alone remained unchanged. Their positions endured untouched, as no precedent existed for altering their authority since the era of the founding heavenly demon. Within 3 months, conflict erupted with the Supreme Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect. Intelligence revealed that the Supreme Saber had consolidated forces across Fujian and Zhejiang provinces, mobilizing near their shared border. In response, the First Elder led the 5th, 10th, and 11th Elders into battle. Despite expectations of a large-scale war, the clash concluded as a relatively minor engagement, signaling that the balance of power had already begun to shift. According to intelligence from the Darkness sect, the supreme saber of the Six Martial Arts sect had sealed themselves off completely, making any large-scale conflict unlikely for the time being. As a precaution against emergencies, 4 elders decided to station themselves in the north to closely monitor the situation. Yeowun remarked that the supreme saber of the Six Martial Arts sect had, unintentionally, been quite helpful this time, as their actions created the perfect opportunity to divide and weaken the forces of the 3 remaining sects within the cult. Markham acknowledged the order without hesitation. 1 month earlier, an envoy from the Orthodox Murim Alliance had delivered a letter from the Alliance leader. The message congratulated the new cult leader on his ascension and informed him that the Murim tournament, originally scheduled for early in the new year and meant to include the demonic cult, had been postponed. Huan Yi reported that although the current Murim Alliance was making efforts to suppress information leaks, it appeared that the Supreme Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect had already planted spies within the Alliance. Yeowun observed that this must have put the Alliance under considerable strain. Huan Yi explained that rooting out the spies was far more difficult for the Murim Alliance than for the demonic cult, as the Alliance consisted of countless independent sects. Aside from the earlier incidents involving the demonic physician and drug-related matters, Cheon Yeowun had also requested access to the substances used by the Supreme Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect's spies, intending to use them to force Yibul Wee and Hyunpa to speak. However, the plan was delayed due to the difficulty of procuring opium poppy. Meanwhile, despite more than a month of treatment by the demonic physician and numerous other healers, Lord Cheon Yeowun remained unconscious, with no indication of when he might awaken. Faced with the lack of progress, Cheon Yeowun began to consider summoning the divine physician as a final measure. Markham reported that the investigation had only revealed one thing: the location to which the Jade Medallion of the Divine Physician had to be brought. That place was the abandoned Sword Valley in Hubei Province, territory controlled by the Wutang sect and the Jiggle sect. Yeowun recognized the situation as troublesome. Although an alliance had been forged with the Orthodox Murim Alliance, the Divine Physician was known to cure all patients except those already dead. Because of that reputation, countless figures within Murim would inevitably covet the Jade Medallion as well. Markham proposed an alternative, suggesting the dispatch of a very small group of elites. Yeowun considered the idea, as Markham clarified that he meant martial masters whose identities were unknown to the outside world. As a result, the second elder Yin Moha, along with Ho Sang-hwa and Baekiji of the Six Swords, were temporarily reassigned to a special dispatch squad. Yin Moha was particularly well suited for the mission, as she normally concealed her identity behind the aged human face mask she used while acting as the second elder. In addition, one agent from the Darkness sect, someone who had periodically infiltrated Orthodox territory as a spy, joined them as a guide. Markham concluded that while the mission was undeniably dangerous, the composition of the squad made success highly likely. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching.